You're listening to the Create a Life That Is Beautiful podcast with your host, Leticia Ringe, and this is episode number 4. Hi, beautiful people, and welcome to episode 4 of the Create a Life That Is Beautiful podcast, a podcast designed to inspire, empower, and support you on the journey of uncovering your truth and purpose in the world. So everyone, it's now Aquarius season, and the day this episode is aired, we're going to be experiencing our full moon total lunar eclipse in Leo. I just love eclipses because any opportunity to reflect and reset excites me. And that is what they give you, particularly a time to reflect on the past 6 months. So have a think about what has happened over the last 6 months and what you were thinking about 6 months ago, and consider what chapter might now be coming to completion for you and what you would now like to call into your life for the next 6 months. I also wanted to mention that now we are at the end of January. This is a wonderful time to conduct an end of month review. So have a look at some of the intentions you set, perhaps at the beginning of the new year, and check out whether you are on track or what might need to change with those intentions. And I'll be sending around a copy of my monthly review sheet in my next newsletter, which is this Sunday. So if you want a copy, make sure you are subscribed to receive my emails. And for anyone who bought a copy of my Create Your Beautiful 2018 workbook, you already have a copy of this monthly review sheet there. So make sure you check it out. I just did mine, and I'm so pleased to see that all of the top priorities I've been actually able to manifest, even though I feel like I've been in a bit of a whirlwind this January. I'm not sure if anyone else is feeling like that, but January seems to have been going on forever. And yeah, I'm really ready for February now. One of the things I wanted to launch was this podcast. And as you know, it's now out there, which I'm so excited about. And thank you for everyone for all your wonderful messages, emails, and for the people who have left reviews. Thank you so much. It's so lovely to hear that this is connecting and that you're finding it super useful. And yeah, sometimes it can feel when you're running a blog or doing a podcast or anything where you're behind a computer and you work for yourself, it can seem like nobody hearing you. But so that's why it's so wonderful when people reach out. It really just lights up my world, and I really do appreciate it. Today, you're going to be hearing from my friend, colleague, and life coach, Ariadne Kapsali. Ariadne is a Beautiful You certified life coach, which is the same life coaching academy that I'm training with. And she's also a yoga and meditation teacher with a mental health and psychology background. So if you're experiencing stress, anxiety, or want help with resilience and overwhelm, Ariadne covers the whole range of different topics, but she is an amazing person for those areas, and you'll hear me talk about this in the episode. She's had such a massive calming influence on my life, and so I just wanted to mention those there. We get into some very interesting territory today. You'll have to excuse me for bumping the microphone a few times. I was getting overly excited, but that's just to show what is to come. In this episode, you will learn all about what yin yoga is. So if you're like me, and you've probably heard this type of yoga being mentioned more and more recently, but not really had an idea about what it was. So Ariadne has just completed a yin yoga training, and so she was able to explain exactly what it is, and it's super interesting. And we also hear about how Ariadne, of course, came to be doing the work that she does today. She began her adult life thinking that she was going to study economics, and then she moved into psychology, worked for the NHS over here in the UK, and then she moved into studying, teaching yoga and then meditation, and most recently life coaching. So she's a great person also to hear about what the difference between life coaching and psychology is, which is something we discuss. We also talk about the power of intention, slowing down, and experience rather than intellectualizing. and how to understand the difference between the intuition and fear or the ego. She also talks about the knowledge and intelligence of the body, resistance and when you need to lean in, and her personal tips for getting started when you have no idea what you want to do with your life in terms of purpose and fulfillment, and so much more. It's a great episode, and I'm so happy to now share this with you. So, yeah, let's dive into the episode. Hello, my friends. Welcome to another episode of the Create a Life That Is Beautiful podcast. Today, I have with me my dear friend and personal life coach, Ariadne Kapsali. She is a Beautiful You certified life coach, meditation teacher, and yoga teacher. And I can't wait for you all to meet her. So welcome to the podcast, Ariadne.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
So our listeners know a little bit more about you, could you please tell us who you are and what you are in the midst of creating today?
Oh, I love that. So who I am? I am Ariadne, as you said. I'm originally from Greece, but I've lived in London for about 15 years, I think now. So it's quite a long time. So I call both places home. I grew up in Athens and I moved to London to study psychology. So I come from a background of mental health and psychology and working in the National Health Service here in the UK. And then I went on to, which I'm sure we'll talk about, but I went on to explore my personal practice of yoga and meditation, and that led me to open up to more and connect to just a deeper part of me, and then really wanted to share that. So went on to train, and it got me where I am here. What am I creating now? It's interesting. I'm in the middle of creating some more workshops. So I've been doing a lot of workshops in London, but I am in the midst of transferring some of that online. So some of it will be, hopefully in 2008, fingers crossed, available online, but also some more in-person retreats this year.
That's so exciting. And I've been to one of your workshops, and I'm going to one this weekend, and they are so wonderful. One thing I didn't mention is the calming influence that Ariadne has had on my own life. She has such a great energy about her, and her workshops really embody that, and I'm sure your yoga teaching does as well. And on that note, you've recently done a yin yoga training. I think some of our listeners would be really interested to know what that even is.
Yeah, yin yoga was, the training was just an amazing experience. I'll tell you a little bit about what it is and the reasons why I decided to train in it. So yin is sort of in relation to yang. So as we understand it, yang is a more active, dynamic, perhaps intense, if you like, a form of yoga. And yin is quite the opposite of that. It's very soft, very nurturing. It doesn't necessarily have to be easy. So a lot of the time yin poses can be quite intense for some people, depending on how your body is, but it really gives people the space to go into their body, which I've loved. So traditionally for me, I trained in a very open approach, so I could integrate a lot of different types of yoga. So I didn't train in a particular style. It was mostly hatha, and which is more traditional, and because of my own practice, I was teaching, or have been teaching, dynamic vinyasa, which is a flow practice, which is quite different because movement comes with a breath, so you're constantly moving in and out of poses. I don't teach a very fast style of vinyasa, so as a person, I am quite, I was going to say slow, which sounds a really weird thing to say, but I am, I do take more time to get into poses, and I encourage people to do the same and breathe into a pose. So yin felt like the natural evolution of that. And I'm very excited about it. I mean, I learned so much. It's like a teaser into meditation for people as well. So, for those of you that are not practicing meditation and perhaps are a little scared or unsure about how it feels, yin is a way of connecting with the body, but also going a little deeper into perhaps, that quiet space. So postures are on the floor usually, and they're supported usually by props, so like blocks or, but again, not necessarily, depends on the teacher. And you hold postures for about 5 minutes, which can be quite a lot. But a lot of the time it just feels so nice to be there.
And it's a really gentle way of holding the postures, right? Rather than, I don't know what the name of the practice is, but those ones where it would be really strenuous, it is more of a gentle.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really gentle. It's meant to not have any or very little muscular engagement. So it's going deeper beyond the muscles. So it's meant to, by holding the pose for so long without engaging the muscle, it's meant to go deeper into the connective tissue, the fascia, and soften and make more space in that way.
Oh, that's so beautiful. So the word that comes up to me is intentional and not slow. When you talk about yourself and everything that you do, that intentional. But were you always intentional as a person, do you think?
That is a very good question. I think on some level, yes, but it was unintentionally. Or perhaps I was quite unaware of it. I remember as a child, I was very self-aware, but in a good way. I was also self-conscious in many ways, but I relied a lot on my own mind and my own imagination to entertain myself. So I remember my sister always made fun of me that, I was in the car and basically sang to myself and told stories in my head or kind of out loud. So there was always that, awareness that I could take care of myself, which in some ways sounds sad. It's not that I had an unhappy childhood or I needed to develop that skill. I actually had a really great family. But it was, I think, naturally, I returned to myself for a lot of perhaps some of the knowledge or, decision making that needed to happen. So to answer your question, in a way, I think I have been intentional, but definitely along the way, I've lost that. So I've sort of veered off and really sought external, validation and just really got disconnected from that inner knowledge. And it's just interesting to, notice when that happens and find ways to come back.
Yeah, that whenever your intuition or your inner wisdom has a way of letting you know when you're off track. And sometimes they can be really significant, almost slaps in the faces, but I mean, the beauty that comes out of it after, once you do pivot and take notice, is just incredible in my experience. But let's go back for a moment. I like to work in a linear fashion. So when you decided to move into psychology, what were you thinking your life would look like then?
Well, funnily enough, when I, in my last 2 years of high school, when we had to pick, what we would go into eventually, I had this, I remember doing all these what are they called? Like career tests or aptitude tests? Is that what they're called? Yeah. Anyway, so they all came out with some sort of humanities or being with people and holding space. I can't remember officially what some of the suggested professions were, but I was really resisting because my mum is a psychologist, so
I didn't know that.
Yes, she's a child psychologist. She works in the school that I went to as well. So of course, as a child, I was just like, I admired my mum, but I was like, no, I can't. I obviously can't do the same as what she does. So I picked economics. Now, this is the most foreign concept for me. I mean, I do really like maths. I can't do it anymore, but I remember enjoying it. So it kind of, in a way made sense on that level, but not in any other way. And I remember starting the semester, I was doing the international baccalaureate. And I think I did 2 months, and then I realized this is just not going to work. I just did not have any interest or desire to learn anymore. So I don't remember the actual process of choosing psychology, but I think it was one of those moments where I intuitively knew that I had to switch my, I guess it's called major, to psychology. So I had quite a, quite a wide understanding of what psychology was because of my mum. She was doing something a bit different, so I always imagined myself to be sort of a hippie therapist eventually, with like, a comfortable couch and like lots of sort of colors around, and just sitting on the couch with not in a sort of Freudian manner, but like in a really comfortable and familiar way with clients, and just holding space. And I remember sort of wanting to have that space where I could bring people in and just give them the tools to understand themselves a little more. It was it took quite a while to lose that image, actually, because I did lose it for, when I moved here, and I actually went on to study the real psychology and, work with patients. I forgot I wanted this, actually. I hadn't thought about this for a while. So thank you for bringing that back. It's really funny.
Yeah, that's so interesting, because really what you've ended up doing is exactly what was driving you in the beginning to even go into psychology. So I just wanted to pause there anyway. So that was a great moment too. With the intuitive nudge that you got, could you just sort of explain in your own words what that feels like for someone who might be just not feeling connected to intuition, or just not understanding what it is, because it is a difficult topic and it's hard to explain. So it'd be great to just, as best as you can, what that sort of feels like or is to you.
I think for a long time the word intuition I found it really intimidating, and I think a lot of people do as well, in the sense that we feel like we're supposed to feel something, or even get some sort of clear voice in our heads that tells us what to do. And I didn't feel that at all. So for a long time, I felt disconnected, because I thought that it should be something almost separate, that I would, really know that it's a clear instruction, do this, don't do that. And what I've come to understand is that intuition, or I often call it a gut feeling. A lot of people connect with that more. I often think about it as more of a physical thing. So my intuition usually speaks to me in sensations, and it's usually, for me, I often understand things in opposites. So there's a sense of contracting, and I know a lot of people relate to that. There's a sense of contracting when something doesn't feel right. So we tend to protect ourselves, our body kind of sort of curls up a little to protect the heart space, because it feels like we want to keep ourselves safe from whatever threat we're perceiving. Even and that sometimes happens when big things that are exciting may be coming up, but it's often in a different way. So that contraction for me is a way that my intuition or my gut feeling says, there's something not quite right here. The opposite of that is the feeling of openness. So when things are perhaps feeling easy in your body, you might still have, when you're excited, you get palpitations in your heart. You might still have that knot in your throat, because it's exciting, but it's also quite scary, especially when you're challenging yourself. So it doesn't mean that your intuition will just, you should do things that only when it feels very easy. It's not about that, but I think you're being guided towards the things that feel like they're flowing, or they feel like they're helping you feel more open. And for me, what I've learned is to follow that feeling of ease but not easy. So there's that challenge, trying to decipher between, okay, this feels too easy, and therefore perhaps I'm just dropping back into my comfort zone, which is okay, but not all the time. And then also finding that space where you feel good. So continuing to choose things that make you feel good, but in a way that is also expansive. So I hope that kind of answers your question.
That does. I love that you brought up that distinction between fear and excitement or challenging yourself. And so the obvious anxiety that you get from stepping out of your comfort zone compared with maybe the intuition telling you that something isn't right and not to go in that direction. That's a really hard distinction to make for a lot of people, and I've struggled with that myself. But as I've connected more to my own body and intuition, I've become better at that. But that I love that if it's expansion or you're excited about it is the way to tell the difference. I always what I try to do is journal or something and find out, okay, why am I feeling scared? What is this? Is it because I'm stepping out and I'm being seen in a way that I wasn't before? Or is it because there's something there that's just doesn't feel right, that it could be some warning? And that is difficult because when you're afraid, you'll come up with any excuses to not expand.
Yeah.
So
Absolutely. I think that's a really good point. And I don't think there's a formula for that. I think that we have to make mistakes in inverted commas. It's not, I think that we learn by experiencing and not by, intellectualizing. So as a natural overanalyzer of everything, I know very well how the mind can bring up all these excuses and all these reasons why you shouldn't do something or you're not ready to do something. And often there's a part part of your intuition that agrees. So there are times when, we are not ready to do certain things. But the ego is much louder, that mind chatter that tends to be repetitive and quite unhelpful and often quite toxic. It will be much louder than your intuition. And this is another thing that I always come back to. If what you're feeling is actually, if what you're noticing rather is actually thoughts, quite loud phrases or, doubts, then it's usually not the intuition speaking. I think for me at least, intuition doesn't speak in words. It speaks in sensations or feelings, or maybe even external events. Like I start to notice things that I didn't notice before, and I interpret that as a way that, okay, this has to come into my awareness now since I'm noticing it. When it's loud sort of fears about, what would happen if this happened, or what if I am not good enough, or what if this person doesn't like me? This is not my intuition speaking. This is my ego. And that's quite a good way of differentiating between the two.
yeah, that's great. And another point I wanted to make is about your mother being a child psychologist and you sort of rebelling in a way by wanting to do something completely different and going into economics. I think that's something that a lot of people would do. And actually I reflected on my own journey as you're talking about that. And I went into law, and I did that because I wanted to have a serious career, even though I actually really wanted to be a child psychologist. It was, yeah, I had like a mentor for child psychology, but I wanted to, because I just wanted to have a really serious career, and that was a way of rebelling against, I think, my family in some ways. But I just think that's really interesting to note for people, because when you're forced to choose something at such a young age, these are the the things you that motivate you. And I think that's really important to just reflect on what is really influencing you. Is it something to do with either rebelling, or is it a way of proving yourself to the people around you, or is it really coming from this place of, this is what I'm really curious about or interested in, and I just want to learn more. And actually, that curiosity, I think that's a really big indication that that is the intuition guiding you, that those little taps of inspiration. I want to check this out, I want to do this. And that's a lot softer than passion for people, which can be, I think that's just really helpful. How have you found curiosity and intuition? Do you think that they're linked, or what are your thoughts on that?
Um, could I just say something about what you've just said about, choosing at such a young age? I think it's so difficult for most of us. And even now, I often say, I wish that I was someone that, knew that this is the one career I want, and forever knew that this is the path for me. And this just has not been the case. And I think this is the difficulty with a lot of the advice out there to find your passion. And, we often think that it's this one thing, like the holy grail that we're looking for. And if we haven't found it, then we feel like somehow we're lacking. And I think it's just so unhelpful. I think there is a small amount out there of people that, they've just always wanted to be a lawyer, they always wanted to be a doctor, and that's great, and they go on this path. And when they get to do that work, then they're happy. But there's all this, the rest of us that are choosing based on, as you say, different factors that we're, at 17, we're mostly unaware of. I think I chose economics as a rebellion in a way, which is a weird rebellion. But, at the same time, I chose it because I thought, I really want to make sure that I'm supported financially. So what a great way, but, to study economics. Completely oblivious to, what it actually means to, studying economics. What would I end up doing? I had no idea. So I think to go back to your question, curiosity and intuition, for me, let me just think about that. I think for me, curiosity is a way to cultivate my intuition. So it's a practice. There are some people that are naturally curious, and I admire that skill now, or that trait. And I tend to be very respectful, in the sense that I don't want to pry. So I often don't ask questions. So when I meet people, I want to make sure they feel comfortable. So I will make space for them, but I will not kind of push too hard until I feel that they're ready, which is good in some ways, but in other ways it means that I often don't get to find out things. And I've recently observed my little sister. She's not little anymore, so if she's listening to this eventually, she'll probably say I'm not little anymore. Anyway, but she naturally asks many questions, and she is curious in ways that allow her to then experience so much more. So I'm learning a lot from her. And I think this is, for people that are not naturally curious, it's a great way to connect to your intuition, because once you start, exploring things, experiences that you're not aware of, it puts you in that space of, of the new, of uncertainty, which can be a bit scary and challenging, but it's triggering that connection with a deeper part of you that then responds to see, do I like this? How am I feeling? And you enter a space where you're not controlling the situation. It's still safe, most of depending on what you're doing, of course. But it's a scenario where you're able to just notice, your natural response. And I feel that brings you closer to yourself.
That's so great. There's so many points there. I love that you mentioned about feeling like you need to find the one when it comes to your career. And that was something that just like drove me insane in some ways as a well for a lot of my life actually as an adult. And I was also in search of that, what is that one passion. I was passionate about a lot of things. I would use the word passionate, but I couldn't figure out like, well, which one is the one. I just want to figure out what the one is, what is my path. And instead of following my curiosity in that moment and what I was really interested about, would try to I thought I needed to pick one. And so that became such a pressure, because then once you're on a path and you realize that, okay, I'm curious or interested or passionate about other things that I want to explore, but you are already, a couple of years in, it's like chasing your losses. You're like, how far do I keep going? When do I cut loose? And it just becomes really difficult. So what I've learned is to just ignore all of that and follow your interests in that moment. Like, what is most interesting to you, because that is most important, I believe. And yeah, so I just wanted to tap on that. And then also about curiosity in itself, about being a curious person and asking questions. Yeah, I think I completely understand where you're coming from. And I think that's because we're sensitive to how it makes other people feel, but also you don't learn anything by not asking. So there's that balance. And I've been the same. I like to be really respectful of other people's and how they're feeling, and I can pick up on how someone's energy and whether it's the right moment to ask. But sometimes that means it's heightened. And my older brother actually is just incredible at connecting with anyone. He's amazing, and he also does it in a way that's really respectful, but he isn't afraid to ask questions. So I've always admired him too, and I've been trying to be more curious as well. And also, I think, give up that need of being an expert. So need of feeling like you might be asking like a silly question, because that's something Brene Brown talks about in her new book, Braving the Wilderness. We don't ask questions as a culture or society, like across many, because we have this idolization of the expert and no one wanting to appear like they don't know. And so I've really been trying to sort of use that perspective to ask questions, and it's been really interesting actually. It's motivated me a lot more. So yeah. Anyway, how about we talk about how you moved from then psychology to life after psychology? What happened?
Well, my first job after graduating was in forensic mental health. So I was in a psychiatric hospital, which was actually a sort of a prison. So that was my first formal experience of working in, an application of psychology. It was a really hard experience. I learned so much, and I'm very happy that I've done that. I stayed there for a year, and throughout that year, I needed to take care of myself, and this is probably the first time I knew that my natural way of taking care of myself was not enough. And this is when I remember going much more deeper into my yoga practice. So and when I say deeper, I just mean I committed to it more. So yoga was there a while before, but it was probably within that year that I felt the need to go into that space where I felt safe, where I felt like I connected with myself, but also it gave me that perspective, because it was a really hard, it was a reality check, being with people who will probably never come back to the community, who had really difficult experiences in their life, and that caused them to commit crimes, and also being in a position where you want to help but you can't. And yoga and eventually meditation taught me to manage that discomfort, or I'm still learning that, but gave me some tools in learning how to manage discomfort, how to self-regulate, how to understand emotion on a different way, because I had the psychology, so I had the theory, but really I didn't have the personal experience of managing difficult emotions. So to cut a long story short, this is when I realized, okay, there's a whole world out there that links to the body. And I grew up in a relatively academic / intellectual, environment, and none of us were particularly sporty. And I think I prioritized intellect over the body. And having spent a lot of time in academia, and also still back then thinking that I would end up doing a PhD or continue somehow, in research, then it never occurred to me to explore the body in that way. And slowly I started realizing that there's this whole world that I am not aware of, and I would love to be able to bring that in as part of therapy, if you want to call it that, or something. So something was telling me there's more there to understand and to go into. So eventually, I decided to do my teacher training here in London as a yoga teacher, and that came probably about 5 years after this, or 4 years after that, and it was probably one of the best experiences ever. It was 18 months. It was really tough. I still worked full time, and I slowly started teaching after that, or still while training and after that. And I think the more I taught and the more I developed my own practice, the more I realized that psychology as it was practiced right now here and within the NHS was not enough in terms of what I wanted to be doing with people. I wanted to be in a position to bring tools from yoga and meditation and other practices that I was using. And I also wanted to eventually work with people who were perhaps not in a clinical population. So eventually it became quite clear that I didn't need to be in the environments that I was choosing to be. And there's a side point here, if it's okay to make, which relates to what you were talking about before, choosing to do the most serious thing or the hard thing. And the jobs I was choosing and the experiences that I thought I should have, it was almost an attempt to prove that I could do the hardest thing. So I put myself in all these situations and I learned loads, and I'm grateful for that. But I now know it came out of a fear that I wasn't enough, that what I was called to do, or I was curious about, wasn't serious enough, wouldn't be taken as seriously as working in a hospital or doing all the other things that I ended up doing. So eventually, this is a really long story, eventually I started exploring the possibility of moving out of the path of psychology and doing, bringing all of that together. And I really wanted, still coming from that academic background, I really wanted to be safe in doing so. So I wanted to still have a profession and the training to bring, to put the skills together. And then from there to create something that felt more like me. So I came across the Beautiful You Coaching Academy quite a few times before I decided to do the training. I explored life coaching for a couple of years before I trained, and eventually did the training, and about 2.5 years ago, left my last job in the National Health Service.
Wow, and how long had you been there by that stage?
Overall, it would be about 10 years. Yeah.
Wow, and how did you find that that transition from leaving? Was it hard, or was it like just everything was like it's time?
Because it was not a spontaneous decision to leave. It felt like it was the right time. It was really scary. And I remember 6 months after leaving, I was like, what the hell am I doing? For the first time I was out on my own, didn't have a boss, didn't have a salary. But it did feel like it was the time to go.
Okay. And when you moved into yoga, when you started practicing yoga regularly, did you do that as a way to like cope with the stress of the job? Would that have been one of the primary motivations?
Yes, absolutely. It became the way that I exercised. I didn't really like the gym. I attempted it many times. So it was initially, what brought me to it was the physical exercise, but then I stayed for the stress relief.
Yeah, it's just amazing. I found the role that yoga plays for many people in overcoming like anxiety, depression, stress, or using it as a relief from any of those conditions. I've experienced that myself. So yeah, I just wanted to know what did yoga teach you?
The first thing it taught me was that I have a body and it has a wealth of knowledge, which I was not at all connected to. And I remember the first time I went into like a deep back bend and I cried in class, and it was just a release of emotion. I didn't even have the need to talk about it, which was very strange for me because as I said before, I tend to analyze everything and want to understand everything on an intellectual level. But my body was doing something else, and that was enough. So my mind was calm in a way. And from there, it just taught me that, there doesn't have to be a separation between the body and the mind and beyond. And I'm still exploring that. I think there's so many layers to understand and feel into that. But I think yoga has been, my sanctuary in the sense that, I resisted a lot. That's how I know it's so important to me as well. So I do still have to push myself to commit on a physical level. It's much easier for me to still intellectualize even yoga, but showing up again and again on the mat is a challenge that and that is another lesson in itself. Why do you commit to things that are good for you, and what brings you back? And, does it mean something that I don't have the motivation to come back? I don't think it does. It just means that I'm human, and there's certain things that I just have to help myself do.
And so let's talk a little bit more about what you just mentioned there about resistance, and about when you need to lean into the resistance, and also about when you need to like surrender or relinquish control.
Yes, well, big topics.
Yeah.
Where do I start? With resistance, it's there all the time, and resistance, I guess, is a way that fear manifests. So we're afraid that something is either too big, too much, or too important, and therefore there's a risk involved that we will fail at it, or perhaps we are afraid that we're going to be too exposed, too vulnerable. They're all similar fears. And you mentioned Brené Brown, and she talks a lot about obviously the need to belong, and a lot of the fears that I've noticed that I have, and I know a lot of my clients do, is that fear of being alone, being separated, being judged. And resistance then comes up a lot as a result of that fear. So I resist doing things that are either challenging because they're exposing. But I also, as I said before, resist things that perhaps make me feel good, which is really a weird concept to understand. But as humans, we are, in a way, we want to be comfortable. So when we are used to a situation, whether it's a good situation or a relatively not so good situation, if we're used to it, we almost subconsciously will choose to stay in it, over challenging and changing, because change is very scary. So resistance comes up when perhaps we're creating a change. And I think resistance comes up a lot when there's a fear of, okay, I have no idea what's going to happen, so I'd rather not go there. And when I say this, it's very important to understand that we don't choose this consciously. We're not aware that we're choosing slight being unhappy over not knowing what's going to happen. But perhaps we're often on an automatic pilot. We're not really sure. We do things without recognizing the roots of that behavior. And slowly starting to recognize, okay, well, what are my habitual patterns here? Oh yeah, I tend to, when I notice that something's about to change, something big is going to happen, an opportunity is coming up. Oh, I tend to eat loads of chocolate, or I tend to, just go out and drink loads, and that perhaps brings me back to a level of, I have to focus on being a bit uncomfortable, and therefore don't have to focus on the scary big thing that's coming up.
And do you think that meditation was really helpful for being able to have that awareness or build that awareness?
A resistance, I understood it first with the physical practice of yoga, and that was because it came up as a commentary in my head when I was trying to do poses. So eventually, yes, meditation did obviously address that as well, but the first experience was that, it being in a pose and fighting internally, oh, I can go deeper, oh, she's doing it better than me, oh, I did it last week, why can I not do it now? Or I'm so tired, I don't want to do any of this. Why am I here? Oh, I don't like this teacher.
Oh my gosh, just that the yoga classroom is like such a good representation of life.
So absolutely.
I'd never thought about all of that, but just all the thoughts that even go through your head in just one yoga practice. I love when the teachers say, don't look at the person next to you. Feel your own body. What does your body need? How far can you go? What's safe for you? And that was just amazing to me, because in most gyms you're told to just keep pushing yourself. Everybody's competing with one another, and then people get injured, and there's consequences that are different for different people. And yeah, so I love that yoga is really, it does build that awareness, because you've got nowhere to run to. You're listening, you can hear all of your thoughts really loudly. And especially when you are trying, there's also the voice that, oh, I can't do that, I'm not good enough, I can't do that, going in your head as well. So yeah, that's really interesting. I never heard of that. And I never thought about it. And so then with meditation, how did that build into your journey?
Well, I came into meditation through the practice of breath. So in yoga, the first thing that I personally like to teach people is how to breathe. For me, the poses are secondary. So I then started to explore pranayama, so breathing practice, much more focused. And I think I was naturally attracted to meditation just because I do like being quiet. I am naturally introspective. And it just became that space for me to to bring all of that together. I naturally need the quiet. Often meditation is not quiet at all, as you said. And in your head you have, with yoga you can still get distracted, and that's why it's a nicer way into something like that. But meditation, that's where you have nowhere to go. And again, it's something that I resist, but it's probably the most important tool now in my life. And it's just taught me to, one, that we need to persevere and commit to things. Two, that it doesn't matter whether you understand it, you actually have to practice it for it to have an effect, which is so important when you're perhaps starting to explore all of this, self-development. And we read all these books, but really then you have to go and practice and apply it on yourself and see how you feel. It also taught me that things change all the time. So being aware of that change, that my thoughts change, my emotions change, how my body feels change, and therefore my environment changes, it is just slowly getting used to that continuous, movement, but still being able to return to a space within that I feel steady and I feel grounded, and I'm not pulled in so many different directions. And it's a skill. It's not, I don't believe that you ever, master meditation. Perhaps someone, really enlightened might be, but I think the majority of us living in the normal world, it's just a skill that we keep practicing.
Yeah. And what about, you've done your meditation and your yoga, and you've got your life coaching, and so it's so beautiful, because as you start to feel a desire for something more or another way to expand, or maybe it's something that you're practicing, and so you want to deepen your own practice and then teach your knowledge to others, is like, have you found being in an area where there's so much room to evolve as a person and as yourself, really freeing? Or it's a leading question, but like, how is that compared to being within an industry where it's just a lot more narrow, even though there are of course so many options within that? But how have you found that for you?
I think it's a great question, because I think one of the reasons why I decided to move away from psychology was that sense that the way that I had to do my job was quite structured, and that was because of what I was doing. As you say, there's plenty of other options, and there's freedom within it. But at the place where I am now, it has felt freeing, to use your word. It is very scary because I have full responsibility over what I do, and there's no one to blame. You can't complain about the boss not allowing you to do things you want to do, and that at the same time means that you kind of have to choose what. And as a life coach, is very interesting. You have to choose what you keep for yourself and what you decide to share and what you decide to, as you say, evolve as part of your work. And this is quite a big thing in my life now, that I am naturally open, in the sense that I do like to share about what I've practiced and what I'm trying, but I'm also playing with keeping certain things for me, and it's just it's an interesting experience as well.
Yeah, absolutely, that is. And so is there any advice that you would give your younger self, knowing what you do today? And I'm not saying that you'd change anything, because you wouldn't be exactly where you are today, but is there any advice you would give your younger self?
I've thought about this a lot over time, because I was not. I think I seemed quite confident, but I had a lot of doubt within, and I didn't trust myself. I perhaps made decisions that were right, if you're thinking about right or wrong, or that led me somewhere which was helpful. But I would suggest is a very easy. I would really encourage my old, my younger self to have more fun, and to return back to what we were saying, to be more curious, and to trust herself more, and to just do things because they feel good, and to explore what feels good, because I think when we're young we just don't really know what feels good. Yeah, to just play more. I think that was such a big, I was very serious, and I wanted to do the more serious, like you said, I wanted to do the more serious thing, and it just meant that I ended up feeling disconnected.
Yeah, I love that you mentioned fun because, and it's all sort of connected to that, because, if there's only a certain amount of time, we think, to be a child, and we don't realize that, we can still have fun and play and bring those elements into our life as an adult. And actually, when we do that, our eyes are more open to opportunities that are going to bring joy into our life because we're actively practicing that. And I just felt like as an adult, I needed to be so serious. And it's been really interesting on my own journey. What really helped me was actually reflecting on what I loved doing as a child. Like, what
Yeah.
did I want to do to play? And yeah, it's what have you found? Like, have there been moments on your own journey where you've reflected on what you loved as a child?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's so much information there, because as we grow up, we're just veered in directions, aren't we? We learn to listen to external criticism, and often feedback is not given in a helpful way, so it's not constructive at all. But we still learn using that way of communication, that sense that we're not good enough, and therefore we're not focusing on our strengths, we're focusing on the things that are not good, and we therefore keep looking out for answers. We're looking for evidence about what everybody else is doing so that we can also fit in. So we get so much, as children, we are naturally, we respond to what is internally interesting. Children, I guess, very early on at school, then start to pay attention to what they're supposed to do, and slowly, start to understand that there's all this advice and rules and all of that. But still, naturally, they are curious, and they learn by doing. And I think that in my especially in my teenage years, I was so afraid of being judged. I was so worried about giving the right impression, and really concerned about other people's opinions. And I took all of that in my adult life, and I still do. So this is something that I'm working on, and just going back to when I was a child, and remembering the things that really brought me joy, and as I said at the beginning, I spent so much time in my own world. My imagination was just amazing. I had all these like toys, and I would build cities in my room, and just play on my own for hours. And I realized how much little imagination I use now. So that's, yeah, absolutely, going back and trying to remember what brought you joy, and what you were attracted to is, I think, so valuable.
And as now being your own boss and running your own business, although it's challenging and there's a lot of practical sides to it all, but that's also an outlet for you for your creativity and to use your imagination. So that's interesting that that's where you've ended up. And I think a lot of people think they're not creative, but we all have it within us.
Absolutely. I think that, you can be creative in all sorts of different ways. It's not just about putting, paint on a canvas.
Being an artist.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's so interesting. So, I mean, I know we've got to wrap it up soon, and there's just so much we could talk about. The last thing I wanted to mention on your journey or have you speak about was the like difference between psychology and life coaching. Like, sort of what were your motivations there, or what's the the main why behind the life coaching?
Well, life coaching is a very positive and forward-looking approach. Some aspects of psychology have that, but I was within clinical areas of psychology. So my focus when I decided to train as a life coach was to work with people who want to go deeper and understand themselves, but use that information in order to create a life that they love living and they feel aligned with and they find meaningful. So some aspects of psychology, of course, psychology is about understanding yourself, but the main difference between what I used to do and what I do now is that with psychology, you tend to go back over things and understand and process through discussion and analysis. Part of what I was also doing was help people who were not functioning. They couldn't function day to day. In my last job, I work with people with anxiety and but clinical anxiety and depression, and that meant that I was helping them manage some symptoms in order to be able to then function day to day. And although that was really useful and I learned a lot, it felt like I wanted to give people a bit more than that. So life coaching now allows me to perhaps on some level work with people who need some support on managing some symptoms, but I don't do therapy in that way. So the focus is much more on empowering people to take control over what's happening in their lives, and at the same time relinquish control, which is what you mentioned before, and perhaps not go from not functioning to functioning, but from perhaps being in a place where they are functioning but wanting to feel better, wanting to feel more that they're doing something more meaningful, that they are more connected, that they are happy. Funnily enough, in my previous job, we never talked about happiness. It wasn't part of the picture, which is just interesting. It was all about just being able to function day to day.
To survive.
To survive, yeah.
That's such a good distinction between the two, actually, about, the focus is for life coaching really about how could I have the my best, most fulfilled life possible. Like, that's what all the coaching courses talk about being the focus. Whereas, psychology is about how can I function with this world and the way it is. So that's really interesting. And of course you would draw on all of your experience in what you do as a life coach, which is something that's so beautiful with life coaching, and especially with the Beautiful You coaching course. I can't speak for other courses, but they really make a point of drawing on your experience, and that's what makes all the people who go through the course and then go on to be life coaches so different, because they have their own life experience or skills and gifts, and then they focus on those areas and bring it all together. It's really beautiful. Anyway, side note is, so my last question on this area is just, you've given so much amazing advice to all of our listeners, but if there was like one of your top tips that you would give to someone who's listening, who might be saying, okay, I've just got no idea what I want to do with my life, but I really, really, really want to do something. Like, I'm ready. I want to live my best, most fulfilled life possible. Like, what could I do to get started?
That's a really good question. I would say acknowledge the fears. So perhaps use journaling, write down the things that you're kind of concerned about, the things that come in your mind about what if I don't find the thing that I love doing? What if I'm not good enough? All of that. And then see if you can put that to the side and then start from, okay, well, what makes me happy? What are the things that I love doing? And it may just be simple things like I love having, coffee in my balcony in the morning, or I love, painting the living room wall pink or whatever. It doesn't matter. So it doesn't have to be something that relates to a profession. This is one of the biggest things I've learned. Everything is related. We're taught to separate. This is personal life, this is work life. Yes, in some ways we need boundaries, but when you're trying to figure out what brings you alive, it's that you need. It's that excitement, that happiness, the things that bring you joy, that will that contain the information about perhaps what you would like to do as your work.
That's just amazing advice. Like, honestly, see, this is why Ariadne is just the best life coach ever, and I'm so lucky to work with her. I also want to ask you now a personal question. Just the whole create a life that is beautiful for me is about creating a life that you love, enjoy, and are inspired by. So I'd love to know what inspires you today.
What inspires me today? Oh, that's a great question. What has been inspiring me, and it's been like a pattern or a kind of theme over the past year, has been my dog.
Oh.
I know, it's like not a surprise that I'm mentioning her, but
No.
It's just, I've learned so much from spending time with a dog that's, that's not the easiest dog in the world, but she's taught me so much about, being curious and being alive and playing and still being a little bit unsure about new situations, and just observing how she responds. It has just taught me so much. So it's actually, I can call her, the current inspiration, because it just helps me. Being with her frustrates me a lot of the time, but it also means that I'm very present.
Oh, I want a dog so much.
You can borrow mine.
That's so cool. And so the final question today is just what's in store for Ariadne for 2018? And I know that you said workshops, but if you could just expand a little more, that would be awesome.
Well, I really want to bring those, the workshops and the day retreats that I've been running in London to hold more space. So my plan is to run, now I have to be held accountable since I'm saying this, to run a couple of actual either week or long weekend retreats, and to bring people together. And it will include yoga, it will include coaching and meditation and other things. And this is a big part of 2018 for me. And yeah, personally, just still exploring where we move to.
Yes, it's a big it's a big decision to make there. Well, that all sounds wonderful, and I can't wait to see what you create or continue to create, and to be along there for your journey. And I just want to thank you so much for coming on today and sharing all your wisdom with all of our listeners and also myself. It's been so lovely, and yeah, I'm just honored to have you here.
Oh, thank you so much. It's been so wonderful, and it's thank you for the opportunity to actually reflect and spend time talking about all of this. Thank you.
So there it is, my friends. I hope you enjoyed this incredible conversation with Ariadne. You can find her work over at www.ariadnekapsali.com. ariadnekapsali.com. That's AriadneKapsali. And you can also connect with Ariadne on Instagram at Ariadne Kapsali. You can find the show notes for this episode over at www.leticiaringe.com/Ariadne Kapsali. And if you're based in London, check out her half day or day retreats. They're awesome. And for any future life coaches, you can find out more about the Beautiful You Coaching Academy over at www.beautifulyoucoachingacademy.com. So guys, what's next? Well, I'm about to leave for a 5 Rhythms full moon women's only evening to rein in the power of the full moon. So I'm super excited to use this energy to shake out all that I want to leave behind and welcome the next chapter in of my own evolution and expansion, which includes, as of Sunday, I'm now qualified as a theta healer, and I'll be sharing more about what that is shortly. But basically, it's given me so much to think about and so much more confidence in my own empathetic and intuitive abilities. If you're interested in hearing more about my own new moon and full moon rituals, let me know and I will share. If you haven't left a review, guys, please, could you leave a review on iTunes if at all possible, otherwise on SoundCloud or Stitcher. It helps me out so much, and I've been receiving so many wonderful messages, so I know there's so many great things to be said there that would be perfect for a review and really help me getting this podcast out to those that it can help. All right, everyone, you can also subscribe for my weekly Create a Life That Is Beautiful newsletter over at my website. And otherwise, please have a wonderful week, and I'll see you on the next episode next week with more tools to help you unlock your truth and purpose.